The crime crackdown continues. President Trump is looking to expand his crime prevention plan beyond the Capitol. I'll tell you which cities may be next. Plus, it wasn't a great weekend for former National Security Advisor John Bolton. What's next after the feds raided his home and his office? And a new study with an entirely unsurprising conclusion about coffee. Those stories and more today, Monday, August 25th. I'm Caitlin Becker, and this is the New York Postcast. First was Washington, D.C. Now President Trump is setting his sights on two more major U.S. cities in his ongoing crime crackdown, Chicago and New York. Here's the president in the Oval Office on Friday.
I think Chicago will be our next, and then we'll help with New York.
With the president seemingly poised to deploy a new round of federal troops to the Big Apple and the Windy City, Democrats who largely opposed the move in D.C. are unsurprisingly displeased. On Saturday, Illinois Governor Democrat J.B. Pritzker accused the president of attempting to manufacture a crisis, saying there's no reason for Guard troops to be in the streets of Chicago. And Pritzker added that they didn't ask for any help and they weren't asked if they needed some. Quote, "The state of Illinois at this time has received no requests or outreach from the federal government asking if we need assistance. And we've made no requests for federal intervention." Now, Pritzker insists that crime in Chicago is declining and says Trump's motivations for putting boots on the ground there are purely political. But some politicians in New York say a surge in federal police in Manhattan would be welcomed. Republican Congressman Mike Lawler is one of them. Here he is on CBS's Face the Nation on Sunday.
Crime has been a major problem in New York for years, and Kathy Hochul and Albany and New York City Democrats have failed miserably to tackle this crime crisis.
You'd rather troops
Margaret,
than FBI agents or ATF agents or DEA agents. You don't want federal agents who are trained law enforcement officers in New York City. You would rather National Guardsmen who have to be trained to police.
Now, what we saw in Washington, D.C. over the last few weeks was somewhat of a novel occurrence. Since it's our nation's capital, the rules are a little different. A rollout of federal troops in other cities simply won't function the same way, owing to the fact that the federal government doesn't have the same authority to seize control of local police in places like Chicago and New York. Now to Ukraine, to the waiting game for peace and the strikes filling the gaps in between diplomacy. Russia accused Kyiv of a brazen drone attack that ignited a fire at one of its nuclear power plants over the weekend. Russian state media said no one was injured in the strike and that the fire was extinguished. And most importantly, no surges of radiation were detected by Russian authorities. Now, the episode was part of an intense volley of drones and missiles from both sides, all coming as Ukraine marked the 34th anniversary of declaring its independence from the Soviet Union. But while the battlefield remains hot, diplomacy has gone a little chilly. Not what you want to hear just a week or so after peace talks seemed more and more likely. However, in an interview with NBC that aired on Sunday's Meet the Press, Vice President J.D. Vance offered a promising tidbit, saying that the president did manage to secure important assurances from Russia's Vladimir Putin.
What they have conceded is the recognition that Ukraine will have territorial integrity after the war. They've recognized that they're not going to be able to install a puppet regime in Kiev. That was, of course, a major demand at the beginning. And importantly, they've acknowledged that there is going to be some security guarantee to the territorial integrity of Ukraine.
Yeah, that sounds all well and good if Russia does what they say. But as we've talked about here many, many times, the Kremlin tends to pay lip service to whoever they're talking to, and then they go do whatever the hell they want. And in this case, they didn't even wait a hot second. On the very same program, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov undermined each and every piece of what Vance said. He questioned Volodymyr Zelensky's legitimacy. He said there needed to be territorial discussions. And he said that Putin is not ready to meet, at least right now.
There is no meeting planned. Putin is ready to meet with Zelensky when the agenda would be ready for a summit. And this agenda is not ready at all.
No good deed goes unpunished, a hard lesson learned this weekend by an American in Germany. Shortly after midnight on Sunday, an American man in Dresden, Germany, saw two women being harassed aboard a tram. Acting as a good Samaritan, the guy stepped in to help, and he got a knife to the face for his troubles. The unidentified 21-year-old had multiple stab wounds to the face and was rushed to the hospital in serious condition. Pictures from the scene are gruesome. Empty beer bottles litter the tram floor next to blood spatter and tissues that were actually used as makeshift field dressings. A 21-year-old Syrian national was arrested in connection to the slashing less than half a mile away from the scene. And authorities say this guy is a rap sheet: robbery, illegal entry, and grievous bodily harm. But they didn't have enough evidence to officially connect him to this crime. So this guy is back on the streets. Now, a second man suspected of being involved in the attack, the one police believe actually did the stabbing, is on the run. Authorities there are currently poring over surveillance footage and gathering eyewitness statements from other tram passengers. Now to our big story, the case against John Bolton. I'm sure by now you've seen the headlines. On Friday, FBI agents raided the home of former National Security Advisor John Bolton. You kind of couldn't miss them. The story was everywhere, but at the onset, there were a lot more questions than answers. But now we're getting a clearer picture of what the feds were looking for at Bolton's Maryland home and D.C. office. They were looking for evidence that he allegedly took highly sensitive national security documents. In a conversation with The Post, high-ranking FBI officials said that Bolton will likely face charges over his alleged mishandling of these classified materials through a private email server. Now, sources told The Post that Bolton reportedly transferred classified materials to his wife and daughter from his White House desk. This was before Trump fired him from his first administration in September of 2019. Now, investigators opened a case against Bolton in 2020 when they first uncovered this alleged crime. But the investigation went away during the Biden administration, even though the facts of the case were described as, quote, airtight by sources who talked to The Post. Now, this happened around the same time as another totally separate federal probe. Officials tell The Post that this case is unrelated from an investigation into whether Bolton included national security secrets in his 2020 book, The Room Where It Happened. The current FBI director, Kash Patel, only learned about the existence of this other probe in the spring when he had asked for a briefing on all sensitive cases. One senior official who spoke to The Post said that the Biden administration had probable cause years ago, but they said they made no effort to retrieve classified material Bolton is suspected of taking. Now, J.D. Vance talked about the case during his interview on NBC.
We're in the very early stages of an ongoing investigation into John Bolton. I will say we're going to let that investigation proceed. What I can tell you is that unlike the Biden DOJ and the Biden FBI, our law enforcement agencies are going to be driven by law and not by politics. And so if we think that Ambassador Bolton has committed a crime, of course, eventually prosecutions will come.
I asked New York Post White House reporter Diana Narosi to tell us what else we learned, and she highlighted this.
Vance said that, beyond the classified documents, that Bolton has been a concern. He used the word concern in general. So again, we'll just have to wait to see what exactly is going on here.
The search and the question of legal jeopardy have been met with silence.
Nope, he said nothing. So there was only a picture of him arriving at his home and he refused to answer any questions. There was reporters staked outside his house. So he's also keeping quiet.
Federal agents tell The Post that they recovered, quote, a lot of evidence from Bolton's home. Now, Bolton, who was previously the U.S. ambassador to the UN under President George W. Bush and an assistant AG under President Reagan, had served as a short-lived national security advisor to President Trump during his first administration. Since his firing, Bolton has become a very vocal critic of the current president. Now from our friends at Page 6, Nepo babies gone bad. Mingus Reedus, probably not someone who immediately rings a bell to you, but you've no doubt heard of his parents. Mingus is the only child of Walking Dead actor Norman Reedus and 90s supermodel Helena Christensen. He's 25, he lives in New York City, and over the weekend, he found himself in hot water for allegedly beating his girlfriend. On Saturday, Mingus made not one but two separate appearances inside of a Manhattan criminal court. He was arraigned on a litany of charges: third-degree assault, reckless physical injury, aggravated harassment, and second-degree harassment. Prosecutors claim he grabbed his victim by the neck with both hands and choked her, as well as allegedly violently kicking this victim. Now, there are two sides to every story, and the high-profile celebrity attorney representing Reedus is telling a very different one. Priya Chaudhry, who had previously represented Marvel actor Jonathan Majors during his domestic abuse trial, claims that any injuries or bruising that the victim suffered had nothing to do with an assault. Instead, the lawyer says her client was actually doing a good thing and trying to save or help his girlfriend after she had allegedly made a suicide attempt. Now, for now, Reedus is out back in New York. He was released on his own recognizance, and he's been ordered to stay away from the victim. The two had recently ended a roughly 5-month-long relationship, and it was reportedly a messy breakup. And finally today, we all know those "don't talk to me until I've had my morning cup of coffee" people. Hey, you might be one of those people, no judgment, and I am here to tell you that it's okay to be a pre-coffee jerk and a post-coffee ray of sunshine, because science! Researchers at 2 European universities came to the world's most obvious conclusion: drinking that morning cup of joe makes you less of a grouch. Regular caffeine consumers reported feeling happier and more enthusiastic after a cup of coffee, and the good vibes, they lingered for 2.5 hours. Here's how they did the study. 236 young Germans were watched over the course of 4 weeks, answering short surveys 7 times a day on their phone, gauging their moods to measure just how much of an impact that jolt of caffeine makes. I love a biohack, and experts say you can optimize your caffeine habit for world domination. Okay, not world domination, but here's how to really make it work for you. Generally, coffee science brainiacs say you should parcel out your coffee habit. 1 cup of coffee every 4 hours is ideal to boost your mood throughout the day. 1 cup of coffee every 4 hours seems insane to me. I would be bouncing off the walls, my bones would be vibrating in my skin, and I want to know who's doing the counter study on what all of that does to our sleep cycles. Now, if you are currently all keyed up on caffeine this fine Monday morning, might I suggest seeing what else is happening at the New York Post in print or online? And don't forget, since you're all keyed up on that caffeine and you're vibrating like me, use your little hands to like and subscribe to the New York Postcast on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. I'll miss you until tomorrow.